Hello everyone. For our unit on social psychology, we're going to break up these 4 reading sections from the NOBA text into 4 separate lectures. So I'm going to try to keep them pretty condensed and try to minimize the PowerPoints because I know for some of us who are transitioning to the online format, it may take some getting used to. So what I'm going to do is have parts 1 and 2 ready for the first week of our unit, and part 3 and 4 will come as a part of the second week of the unit. More explicit instructions will be provided in our unit module, Unit 10. So what we're going to talk about today is social cognition and attitudes. So the first section of 4. And what we're going to look at is how we as people, I keep promoting this idea that we are psychologists in a sense. We try to infer information and relate information on an everyday basis. We make judgments of others as well as judgments of ourselves. And so we want to kind of take a step back to think about how we personally use all of this information we have, right? And how we kind of use that to represent our world, right? How does that make us make decisions? And how does it promote cognitive efficiency? How do we use these shortcuts? We address a little bit of that in thinking, and it's going to play a substantial role in this section. We're also going to look at some of the social factors that influence how we reason. So this is building the foundation for subsequent chapters on conformity and obedience and other social psychological topics. We kind of want to learn the bases, right? The basis for how we cognate on this level. And we're also going to determine if our reasoning processes are always conscious, and if not, so is our reasoning always a part of our conscious awareness? Sometimes things happen that are behind the scenes, that are more automatic and non-conscious, and how do those affect our thoughts and our behaviors? And most importantly, we're going to look at how explicit and implicit attitudes differ and how they have certain implications for our behavior. And that's going to also be demonstrated in our implicit associations test assignment, which more information can be found in the Unit 10 module as well. So, this section is talking about how we simplify our world. So, social cognition, let's just get the definition out of the way. This is the idea or the study of how people think about the social world. Okay, that's simple enough, right? But we need to understand the effects that others have on our perceptions and our sense of who we are, how we make judgments, how we form attitudes, right? And how we make predictions about the world. So it's thinking about the social world as well as ourselves and how we relate to that social world. What do those influences, what are the implications on our thoughts, to be more specific? So with that social cognition, think of an example that they give us in the text. So if you saw me talking to a problematic student outside the classroom, and all of a sudden I got really quiet when you walked by, and then you continued into the classroom and I started talking to that student again, what might you think was going on in that scenario? Well, for one, you might think that that student was getting in trouble for calling out or talking out too much, right? There's a level of social cognition there. You're making inferences based on previous situations you've encountered, right? Maybe you're like, well, she's getting quiet. She doesn't want me to hear what they're talking about. I've observed that student's behavior, and man, that student is quite annoying, right? You're using all of this information to form, thoughts about your cognitions and kind of determine how you're going to behave in that situation. So maybe you say, I'm just going to keep walking and stick my head down. I'm not even going to say hi. I'm just going to keep walking, right? That's a part of social cognition and social psychology, is examining all those little factors that go into our social interactions. So again, schemas. I keep talking about schemas, right? These mental models or blueprints are going to be substantial in helping us simplify that social world. They give us a blueprint from which to work. Now, they can sound like stereotypes, which we're going to learn about later, but we're going to make a differentiation. Just remember that those schemas are going to be connected concepts and your ideas about things such as a library or what's in a library. And these are going to be formed by direct and indirect experiences, right? Maybe we've been to a library or we've read about awesome libraries, but either way, we're going to build a schema or those connected concepts about what constitutes a library. These schemas help us to reduce our cognitive exertion. So when we talked on levels of consciousness, right, we're trying to exert less cognitive effort or thinking power, if you will. And so we use those schemas as kind of a shortcut. We have person schemas, self schemas, and event schemas or scripts. We talked about event schemas. Kind of think of maybe your daily routine. That's going to be an event schema. Like maybe Monday mornings, you have a particular routine that you get into before you go to class, right? That's an event schema. A person schema is just an idea or a mental model for maybe someone you know, like a friend. Like, what is a friend? What constitutes a friend? You have all these connected concepts. Loyalty, friendliness, fun, right? And your self schema is just the idea and concepts you have related to your self. Now, heuristics, on the other hand, are what we talked about with thinking and intelligence. So these are mental shortcuts that are going to reduce complex problem solving. So whereas schemas are going to be models and categorizations, heuristics are going to help with problem solving. So heuristics are great. Remember we talked about anchoring bias, confirmation bias, hindsight bias, representative bias, availability bias, all of those different types of biases that affect how we process information. Well, that's going to be relevant again. So make sure you review this chart and you kind of refresh yourself on what those are, because those are going to be relevant to how we reduce complex problem solving. For example, with a representative heuristic, unintentional stereotyping of someone or something. So basically, we think that this one person is representative of a group. Well, sometimes heuristics are accurate. If you saw someone walking down the street with maybe a highfalutin scarf, dressed in a really nice business casual wear, reading a really fancy English book, and maybe they were walking around Greenville near ECU, you might think that that is a professor, a college professor, right? Maybe it's an English professor. That would be a representative heuristic. We're trying to pull that information to say this person is representative of a group, which, categorically, sometimes these can work. But also be warned that heuristics are not always accurate because probabilities play into this as well. That person, in speaking of strict numbers, may just as well likely be a truck driver. You're like, what? That doesn't make sense. Because probability-wise, there's not as many full-time faculty professors in the United States as there are truck drivers. So you see where I'm kind of getting at there? We use these heuristics to help us problem solve. But sometimes they're not completely accurate when we look at them in terms of their probability and mathematical terms. So make sure you kind of understand that. Now, when we make predictions about the social world, we're trying to help choose the best course of actions for ourselves. We try to predict what implications our decisions will have based on future feelings and future behaviors. So if I finish this presentation tonight, I will feel so relieved. I will just be riding this wave of euphoria into the nighttime with great nighttime sleep, right? I'm trying to predict my future feelings based on my behaviors, like I'm going to finish this PowerPoint, right? And that helps us choose the best course of action. Well, if I started at this time, maybe I could finish that PowerPoint before 7, right? Well, typically, we have accurate inferences of others, and we tend to do this pretty quickly. That's where the social psychologist resides in all of us. We're pretty good at picking out emotional states in people and personality traits from very brief encounters, right? We kind of organize that information. And sometimes we're even able to predict people's future behaviors based on what we infer of their emotional state and personality traits. So let's say we all have that friend who can be kind of a jerk when you first meet them, right? You always say, oh, that's Joe Schmo. He seems like a jerk, but once you get to know him, right? We say that about some of our friends, maybe. Well, maybe that person making that inference from Joe Schmo's personality traits says that Joe Schmo is probably a frat guy type who likes to mess around too much and goof off, and probably likes to play a lot of practical jokes. Right? That might be an accurate assessment that that person has made, and we're pretty good at making assessments like that. Not saying we should judge all people immediately or trust it implicitly, but we're fairly accurate in this sense. And with more information that comes available, or more interactions with Joe Schmo, for example, we have more improved accuracy in our judgments. So, again, this is not implicitly saying that your initial assessment is 100% correct, but saying it may have more credence than we previously thought. Now, with predictions of ourselves, you would think, well, I have a lot of information on myself. I think I'm pretty good at predicting my behavior, my feelings, and my intensity of the feelings. Well, we do not always hold greater insight into ourselves. It's actually a lot harder because we tend to be overly positive, overconfident in our accuracy and in our potential. So I'll use an example. There was one study where they asked people, it was like a list of people who have died and did really good things and if they were going to heaven or not. And then they put themselves on the list, right? Well, let's just say more people thought they were going to heaven than Mother Teresa. And yes, you'd think if you know anything about Mother Teresa, even though she has been controversial, she has done a lot of good things. Anyway, I'm getting tangents. Sorry, sticking to the point. The idea is that we view ourselves in an overly positive fashion. We always think of ourselves as above average, or I'm about average, average or more, right? But if we're all average looking, who are the people who are below average, right? We tend to be overly positive in our estimations and evaluations of ourselves. Overconfidency and accuracy in our potential.